Many thanks for being here. Thanks to the organisers for our invitation, also the sponsors. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so telling you about C4X Discovery. This is a drug discovery company that the technology that it's based on span out of the University of Manchester. So the company is based in Manchester, and we are a virtual drug discovery company. And what that means is we have the intellectual input in the company at Manchester, but we use a lot of contract research organisations to actually perform the laboratory work, so the biology and chemistry that gets done. So we have about 30 employees, most of them are scientists, and our mission is that we start the process off for drug discovery, and we take these hopefully new drugs through to a certain stage where we then would license it to large pharma. A reasonable proportion of the large pharma pipeline originates in small companies, and we hope to be part of that message. So luckily you've already heard the disclaimer, so we don't need to go through and read all of this. So our aim, and it's an ambitious aim, but it's very important, I think, in a small company to have an ambitious aim, is to be what we would term the world's most productive drug discovery engine. Now, what this means is that right at the beginning of this process, we want to be generating the new ideas and the new molecules for drug development. And then, as I say, at various stages, partner those with large pharma, sometimes before they get to be tested in patients and sometimes after being tested in patients. And the reason why we think we can do this, and we have a unique opportunity, is we have two proprietary technologies that nobody else has. The first technology we actually recently acquired in the last 2 weeks, and it's called Taxonomy 3. What this technology is, which I'll cover a bit later, is a way of exploiting all of the genetic data that's now in the public domain since the human genome was sequenced at the beginning of 2001. And this is a unique mathematical approach to try and pull out why many diseases run in families. So there's this, what we call this missing hereditability. Yet in those last 15 years or so, there's not been great strides in new drugs based on that finding. And it's because it's been a lot harder than people expected to identify new drug targets from people's DNA that later on become causal in disease and therefore can treat disease when we make a new drug against them. So that's one technology we have. The other technology we have is a chemistry-based technology, and this is the second circle on here. So there are generally two types of drug that you take. There's a chemical-based drug. These are often pills that you take orally once or twice a day. And then we also have biological-based drugs, such as antibodies or peptides, and many of these are injected. And the biological-based drugs are very effective, but they're also very expensive. So often they're developed for an important disease, and a minority of the patients actually ultimately get treated by them. They're very effective. So most of the drugs that people take and make the sales for large companies are actually small molecule drugs. They're called the chemical drugs. And so we work in that space alone. But we have a unique way of looking at the small molecule drugs and developing them, which I'll show you as well. And so by putting these two technologies together, we can actually exploit in multiple diseases. So sometimes you'll see a small biotech company like ourselves who will focus on one disease and have a very special, expertise and speciality there. We can work across therapeutic areas, so that obviously gives us more options. And in the end, we will produce new small molecule drugs, oral pills, if you like. So we have the chemistry technology, which we call conformetrics, which I shall show you, and that's where the C4X comes from, conformetrics, which is one of those in-house jokes that everybody who works for C4X understands and nobody externally does, but I shall explain it for you there. We now have a recently acquired human genetics platform. This actually allows us to choose what we're going to work on in the first place, what target in the body we're going to identify to make our drugs against. And most important of all, of course, in this situation is you need the technology, you need the competitive edge, but you need a senior management team who's got experience to not only conduct this research, but then commercialise the research and generate the value for shareholders. So we are into small molecule drugs, as I say. We have this hybrid business model. And what this really means is that for some of the programs, the longer you keep a new drug discovery program inside, if you go into patients, if you show efficacy in patients, if you then license it at that point, you can demand a very large upfront fee. Equally, if you have an early stage program that's very exciting, but it's got a lot of risk because you've not shown it's safe or it really works in patients yet, you'll get a smaller upfront fee, but then if that progresses in the partner's hands, you'll still get the royalty milestones later. So if you're successful, you'll ultimately get the money either way. From a business point of view, it makes sense to have both of those approaches so that you can get early revenue as well as keep perhaps some of the crown jewels for a bit longer. So that's our strategy. None of this is any fee-for-service work. It's entirely about creating novel drugs that when we then partner, we generate the value for shareholders. To do that, you need to work in areas of high unmet medical need where large pharma will be very attracted to what you're doing. The other aspect about our chemistry technology, our conformetrics technology, is it actually makes the process of doing drug discovery more efficient. So another way of looking at that is that we can actually run programs for 4 diseases perhaps rather than 2 for the same cost. And that gives us more opportunity to be successful. So I won't go through all of the people on this slide. The reason I put a bit more detail on these slides for you is that they will be available on the website after the talk and also on our website, so that if you need to go and look at them retrospectively, you can and get more detail that way. But just to say that we have a very experienced management team across the technologies we have. If anybody on this you've heard of other than me today, you will probably know about Clive Dix. Clive has, since leaving GSK maybe 20 years ago, where he ran research in the UK, he has set up numerous UK-based companies developing a variety of therapeutic agents, and then those companies have been bought or assets have been partnered for large sums. He's been very successful, and we are delighted that he's actually now our executive chairman rather than just our chairman. So he's come downstairs, if you like, and more hands-on because he really believes in the model that we're generating. As well as an experienced team running the company, just as important, we have very good guidance at the board level from very experienced people in the bioscience area. The company was floated on AIM in October 2014 with £11 million offering that was raised, and these are the shareholders as we speak today. So the main shareholders are the Aquarius Fund, as a life science fund but originally based in Manchester. We also have Aviva as one of our major shareholders. The 2 original founders of the chemistry technology, that's Charles and Andrew here, have obviously a reasonable share. And we also have Andrew Black, who was the person behind Betfair, so a high wealth individual, and also another life science investment fund, Baillie Gifford. So when the company floated on AIM in 2014, really what happened is that there was a recognition that we had a unique chemistry technology, and the money was raised really to take 2 programs forward to at least early stage clinical development to validate this approach and therefore validate commercially that someone will also license those from you. So we're on the road to that now. Drug discovery is not a quick win game. It takes maybe 2 to 3 years to get an idea into the beginning of clinical development, and then of course during clinical development you then have to prove it works and it's safe in patients as well. But along that way there are a variety of points that you can get the value that you're looking for. So we had 2 major programs. There's a program in addiction and a program for inflammatory diseases, and an idea really for an alternative to a currently marketed drug for diabetes. So this is a biological based drug that's an injectable. The idea here was, can we use our technology to make a chemical-based version of that could then be a once-daily pill? The other attraction of that kind of opportunity is you can combine it with another drug that's already in a pill. A patient can take a single pill a day and get both drugs that way. That's obviously a lot harder to do if one of them's a pill and one of them's injectable. So that's where the company was at flotation. What we've realised deliberately, but recognised it as well, is that there's lots of opportunity with these technologies, and so we've expanded the portfolio into more diseases, into more targets, different disease areas, and this really is what has motivated Clive to become the executive chairman and think about the future, about growing this company based on the technologies we have. So if I just briefly take you through what we've got. So I've talked about why we exist. I'm going to take you through what we've done so far with it and then show you how we do it after that in terms of the technology. So just about a bit more detail about our current pipeline. So this is the drug discovery process. When you get to the IND ready stage, that basically means it's ready to go into patients for the first time. And often this is a key value inflection point for a particular program. So you can see that with our addiction program that was started at IPO, we're getting pretty close here now to that point. We're not quite ready to go into healthy volunteers, the first part of clinical development to show it's safe, but we're getting close. So all of our programs are obviously quite early, and that's consistent with the company's history of obviously being around for a year or two. But we are across different therapeutic areas that all have value, and we're working on targets that numerous companies are interested in. And these are valuable areas, so this is obviously very important. So the addiction is probably a least valuable area and less familiar to you maybe than something like diabetes or inflammatory diseases, but there is still a large unmet medical need in addiction. Obviously there's recognised diseases like nicotine addiction that we treat with, to make people stop smoking, and our drug should work well there. We have 2 programs in diabetes, and we have a program for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. This is a very serious lung disease that's now the 4th major killer worldwide in the developed world, and an oral version again of a biological-based therapy that's recently marketed in psoriasis. We recently started a collaboration with a group in Oxford called the Structural Genomics Consortium, and this is a group that has access to different technologies, targets that are funded by industry, and they can see our technology as a way to help them do their job better. We can see a synergy with them in terms of getting a program in cancer. So we've also started that recently. So I won't go through the detail on these slides. This is really for you to look at later if you need to, but just one slide on each of our programs. So our most advanced program closest to the clinic is the orexin-1 antagonist. And the idea here is that this receptor in the brain is thought to be central to the craving pathway. At the moment, when we treat people who are addicted to cigarettes, they basically get different versions of either nicotine itself, nicotine replacement therapy, or drugs that stimulate that pathway to some degree to try and alleviate wanting the cigarette itself. The idea here is if you can target the craving mechanism itself in the brain, then they won't get that far to want to even go anywhere near the cigarettes. Current medications are pretty effective, so Chantix, marketed by Pfizer, is the market leader for people who want to stop smoking by using pharmacological therapy. It works quite well. Half the patients do end up stopping smoking, but they only last for about 3 months. If you extend this out, this is Pfizer's marketing data, so it looks great, but if you extend this out, what you'll actually see is it starts dropping off and patients relapse. If we can target the craving itself, the idea would be that that relapse won't occur. So there's a big need here. AstraZeneca bought a small company last year who had an orexin-1 antagonist like us only. So this company just had one asset for $145 million. That's the total deal size, so that's what they'll get once they've proven it works in patients. They got a little bit of upfront because of its quite early stage for several million. But that shows you that there's interest in the area that we're in. Our mission is to take it a bit further than they had. They hadn't gone into patients. We want to go into patients, show that we've actually got a real drug rather than something that's predicted to be a real drug. Demonstrate it's active in the brain and it's safe, and then look to license it to large pharma, because clinical trials in addiction do take some skill and expertise to perform. And a company who's already in that area has that on board. The other disadvantage with current marketed therapy is that they have black box warnings. What this means is that doctors are concerned about prescribing the medication to certain patient populations. If you can have a new drug that targets the craving, doesn't have a risk profile on its safety, you're obviously in a very good place to succeed those drugs that are there. Our second most advanced program is for COPD, this chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It's a very large market, and it's treated normally by reliever bronchodilators, they're called. You'll see patients taking an inhaler when they're short of breath, and they'll suddenly get a bit of breath back. But it won't last, and it doesn't treat the underlying cause of disease. It's the inflammation in the lungs that causes the disease, so we need what are called anti-inflammatories that target what's happening in the lungs to relieve the disease process. Also, oxidants in the lung are produced with the disease and also by smoking, which often these patients do. So if you can have a drug that targets both of these areas, that should be very successful and offer a lot of clinical benefit. Currently, there's only one drug that works on this axis, which is called roflumilast, which is now marketed by AstraZeneca. And it does work. This is an effect on exacerbation rate, so this is sort of significant instances of difficulty in the patient's breathing and having to go to hospital. So there's a reduction on that, which costs a lot of money, of course, to treat in this therapy, but it's not very effective. And also, it's not very well tolerated, this drug. It's got GI side effects, so people get nausea quite readily. So it's not really had that much sales. So if you could have a version like this that was more efficacious and safer, again, that would be what people are looking for. And that's what this target, NRF2, that we're working on, should do. A very big success story for Novartis last year was the approval of this antibody, which is so it's an injectable therapy for psoriasis. Moderate to severe psoriasis is very, very unpleasant for patients, and until this was launched, about half of patients responded to current therapy, and they responded to about 50%. So in other words, it cleared up half of the psoriasis in half the patients. What's so significant about this therapy is it works in 80% of patients and is 95% effective on the psoriasis. So it's really changed the lives of moderate to severe psoriasis patients. But as I say, it's a biological-based therapy. It's expensive. Probably only 10 to 20% of patients who have moderate to severe psoriasis will get this therapy based on its cost. If you could have an oral version that was a bit cheaper, but not cheap, obviously you've still got to make the money and justify the development of drugs in the first place, you can imagine that you take up a large market share for those patients. And we know that the mechanism now works very well. So our idea is to try and, using our technology, produce a small molecule oral version of this. Novartis recognised this possibility, so they bought a small company a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago now nearly, called Ensemble, who had come across a way of perhaps doing this. And large pharma are also trying to do this, but it's very difficult. You need a particular insight, particular technology to perhaps get you there, and that's why we're in this area. And the last therapeutic area that we're really in at the moment is in diabetes. Now, diabetes is an area now where there's an awful lot of drugs marketed. Many of those drugs are now becoming generic, so they are therefore cheaper and therefore become the first line of therapy for doctors to prescribe. So what you need for new therapies, because there's still an unmet medical need, is something that's going to be additive and differentiated from the cheaper generic medications or the proprietary premium priced medications that are currently on the market today. So that's very important. So both our programs have that differentiation. So the first one, as I mentioned before, is an oral version, small molecule version of a marketed drug, Victoza. And the other is a new target, so it's got a lot of interest because of its novelty, but it offers different advantages as well as affecting blood glucose, which is very important, of course, in diabetes. It only works if you've got high blood glucose. So you might hear about hyperglycemia, where patients take too much of the medication, which really takes the glucose out of your blood to such a degree that you may go into a coma. This can't have that problem because of the way it works. And also, these beta cells, these are the key cells in the pancreas that are affected in diabetes. They deteriorate over time with chronic diabetes. This mechanism may protect against them as well. So I'll just quickly go through our technology. We want to branch out now and do new programs to really exploit the technology we have. And to choose new programs, we have 3 areas where we can choose them. We can choose them with our proprietary genetics platform, which I'll describe in a minute. We have interactions with large pharma or small pharma, or the SGC, as I mentioned, where we can use someone else's target, but then we can exploit it. Or indeed just do what we call an industry approach, where a new target suddenly is in the scientific literature, and using our technology we can exploit it in a very quick manner. So 30 seconds on our 2 technologies. Actually, what I will do is I'll use this slide to show you. So taxonomy 3, this is this DNA genetic-based technology. So what we do currently is people's DNA will be sequenced who have disease, and patients who don't have disease will also have to be sequenced. And you look for big differences between the disease and the normal people. So in most patients who have the disease, so they have this gene mutation, And most patients who don't have the disease, they don't have that mutation. They're the big signals. They're also easier to find, and that's where the industry has started with. And that's the kind of peak that you see. But many of these easy-to-find signals just haven't translated into new drug mechanisms. We have a mathematical approach that increases the sensitivity of this detection, basically, so that you get more peaks to look at, but also you might then realise that these 3 peaks are actually related. They're in the same biological pathway. So you might have missed that before because maybe 20% of patients have this one, another 20 have this one, and so on. But actually it's all part of the same pathway, and the drug works at the top or the bottom of that pathway. So that gives us some new angles to work on. Our chemistry-based technology relies on the fact that everybody works in 2 dimensions when they draw chemical structures. Anybody who's done chemistry at school or beyond will recognise something like this. In reality, drug molecules are 3D structures, and if the video can work before I finish, they actually move around. So we're the only company who can analyse a drug molecule and determine exactly what the drug looks like when it's in the blood, for example, in solution. What this means is that a drug molecule, in reality, if you put all of those different drug modes on top of each other, actually forms a shape like this. But only one of those shapes is the one that, when the drug's working, it occupies. And that's shown here in blue. So our technology allows us to work out exactly the right shape for drug molecules that you need, rather than doing an iterative process. Whereas what would normally happen is a chemist would make an awful lot of variations of this to determine which one's active. We can actually look and identify what the activity is. That means you can make a lot less, do a lot less chemistry. These are all marketed drugs. I just wanted to show you that by looking at the shapes of these drugs, you can see that they all are very flexible. Most marketed drugs do move around quite a lot. So there is a possibility that some of these could be safer if they were more rigid, now that you understand what the shape needs to be. And we're the only people who can do this. I'll just quickly summarise now, so it's time for questions. So we have 2 proprietary and cutting-edge technologies: the genetics platform to identify the drug targets to work on, and Conformetrics, the chemistry technology to design molecules right from the start of the drug discovery process. We have a hybrid business model where with these programs we'll either look to license them relatively early, so then we can exploit the expertise from large pharma and bring some revenue in the near term, but we'll also choose to keep some of those programs longer to get them to more key inflection points where we can demand greater value for them, as they will have been de-risked to some extent. We are into small molecules, and generally oral small molecules, so drug pills, capsules or tablets, and we have the opportunity, because of our technologies, to get to be first in class. There are potential options for us where we might be able to switch existing marketed drugs into a pill form by making a new molecule that does the same thing. That obviously is de-risked from a clinical point of view. We know that the mechanism works. We then just have to generate the right molecule to do it. We'll be working in high unmet medical need areas, but we're not limited to one therapeutic area or another. And we have now a management team with a significant track record of making value in this arena. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. So I'd like to open it up to questions now. So if anybody's got a question for Craig, here we go.
When do you envisage a revenue stream for distribution to your shareholders? Are you profitable? How's your market capitalisation progressed since you came to market?
So our market capitalisation is round about the same as it was at IPO. So the share price initially dropped from about £1 to about, if you've seen already, back to about 60, 75p. It's back up to just over £1 now, and I think that was entirely driven by Clive's decision to move from chairman down to executive chairman and give the message of exactly how this company is going to generate the revenue in a more clear manner. So to answer your first question, the real value in what we do will be when we get to the clinic for our programs. If we wait for all of those to get to the clinic on the timescales I've shown you, that means that particular revenue, high revenue, is quite far away for some of those programs. So what I would suggest is that we will expect to take some programs to the clinic, Some of them that we make sure we work in attractive areas may get partnered earlier, which will demand an initial lower upfront. But then in partnership with a large pharma company, for example, we'll have milestone-driven events, first time patient's dosed, first time a diseased patient is dosed, next clinical trial initiation, and then royalties on any sales. So in the short term, there'll be deal-driven milestone events with a long-term prospect of royalties on sales. But that is 8 years away. So I think the focus really is on the milestone events earlier.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just the back there.
So what happens if and when late side effects are found after the drugs are licensed to a third party? Are you responsible?
No, so when you have a licensing deal, the large pharma basically takes the drug from you, buys the rights, you lose all rights to it, all responsibility, and they take it on. So that risk that you're identifying is therefore reflected in the price you get up front and then the price you get later. So if we license a drug before it's gone into people, then obviously, even though we will have very good animal safety data, there's obviously a risk there that it's got an issue. So therefore, the reward will be after that safety has been demonstrated. You can still obviously get more rare side effects as you go through the drug development process and you start treating more patients. One of the elements I didn't touch on with our technology is I showed you all those pictures of the multiple shapes that drug molecules can occupy. And I mentioned that there's one shape that you need for the action of the drug you want. Many of the side effects that other drugs have are caused by the other shapes that are present. So one of our strategies, the reason we've got this better, safer, faster strapline that companies like us need, is that because we can determine those shapes as we're developing the drug molecule, we can make sure that we have as less or little shapes as possible other than the one we want by design. That therefore will de-risk its chances of having these off-target side effects that could be detected later on. So part of our package will be that it should be safer. Okay.
Any other questions? I had a quick question, Craig. What's the level of cash burn for the company and kind of how long is the company funded for at present?
Okay, so I think on my slide I showed an update that we had £11 million at the start. The last financial update we gave, we have 7.5. We're very soon to release our interim financials in the next week or two, but I don't think I can tell you what it is until it's released.
No.
But you're absolutely right. In this business, you are developing something, so you're spending money.
Sure.
We have at least a year's cash left, if not more.
Right.
That's in the absence of any licensing deal on our current portfolio. And as I say, what we are looking to do actively on both the more advanced programs and the earlier ones is to do some transactions. So we are very well aware of the situation we're in, but we are good to go for at least a year.
Excellent. And the other question, I noticed on one of the slides that you talked about, is it trebling the number of treatments or potential treatments by 2019? Yeah. Is there any kind of limit to the number of treatments you could target?
So one of the reasons that Clive was so excited and we're putting out this message about the engine is that because we're like Apple, that we have the intellectual input at the start with the technologies, but then all of the lab work is done essentially outside. It's a very scalable business, and the scale really is driven by making sure that we have access to the technologies we have for the capability that we need and enough intellectual input. But after that, it's really about money to fund the work outside. So that's why we think to make the most value for this company, we should be doing more with the technology rather than limited to 3 or 5 programs. So that's where the threefold increase comes from.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Craig. Thanks for that. I think we'll